You have tried discipline as a decision, as an identity statement, as a morning routine and a productivity system, and a commitment made on Sunday night that lasted until Wednesday. You know what the failure point feels like, the moment the initial motivation depletes, and the discipline becomes a choice against preference. And the preference wins. The men who appear addicted to discipline are not making a harder choice at that moment. They have built a different relationship with the moment itself. The resistance is still there. The preference for the easier path is still there. What changed is that the reward architecture around the disciplined behavior has been structured to fire in a way that makes the discipline itself feel like the thing the brain is seeking, rather than the thing it is fighting. Bruce Banner spent years trying to manage the Hulk through suppression, through force of will applied against a force that will always eventually win when the contest is willpower alone. What actually worked was what he stopped fighting and started building, not the elimination of the force, but the architecture that directed it. The discipline addiction works identically. You do not force yourself to want the hard thing. You build the architecture that makes the brain want it. 7 strategies. Here is every one. Strategy 1. Make the completion the reward, not the result. The mistake most people make when building discipline is attaching the reward to the outcome, the body that arrives after 6 months of training, the skill that matures after a year of practice. That reward is too distant to fire the neurochemical response that builds the addiction. The reward needs to attach to the completion of today's session, not the outcome, the act of finishing. A brief, deliberate acknowledgement after every completed session, a mark on a calendar, a written sentence, 30 seconds of noticing that the thing happened, trains the brain to associate the completion itself with reward. Over weeks, the brain begins anticipating the reward at the start of the session rather than waiting for the distant outcome. That anticipation is the beginning of the addiction. Strategy 2. Build identity language into the daily practice. Not affirmation, description. After completing the disciplined behavior, state to yourself, internally or in writing, what this makes you. Someone who does this. Not someone trying to do this, someone who does it. The identity statement, I run, fires different neural processes than I am trying to run more. The brain organizes behavior around identity. Every completed session followed by an identity statement deposits into the identity account. After 30 deposits, the account balance changes the approach reflex, because the approach now protects an identity rather than executing a preference. Strategy 3. Shrink the session until starting feels automatic. The most significant friction in any disciplined practice is not the middle or the end. It is the start. When the session feels large, the start feels costly. When the session feels manageable, the start is easy. Reduce the committed session length to the point where starting feels like almost nothing. 2 pages, 10 minutes, 1 set. The completion of the small session still fires the reward association. The identity deposit still occurs. And the session almost always extends beyond the minimum once the start has happened, because the resistance was at the door, not inside the room. Get through the door every day. The room takes care of itself. Strategy 4. Track the streak, but measure the direction, not the perfection. A broken streak managed correctly does not break the addiction. It tests it. The man who misses 1 session and returns the next day has a 1-day interruption. The man who misses 1 session and interprets it as the end of the streak has an indefinite abandonment. Track the practice daily. When a miss occurs, the rule is simple. Never miss twice. The streak metric that builds the addiction is not consecutive days without a miss. It is the overall direction, more days completed than missed, the ratio improving across months. The practice becoming the default rather than the exception. Banner did not abandon the architecture every time it failed. He refined it. Same principle. Stay with strategies 5 through 7. The first 4 build the neurochemical architecture. What comes next makes the architecture self-reinforcing, and strategy 6 is the one that most people implementing discipline practices have never tried and never return from once they do. Strategy 5. Stack the discipline onto an existing anchor. The most reliable trigger for a disciplined behavior is an existing behavior that precedes it reliably every day, not a time, an action. After the morning coffee is made, the pages are written. After the workday ends, the shoes go on. After dinner, the language app opens. The anchor behavior fires the disciplined behavior through proximity, rather than through decision. Over weeks, the chain becomes automatic. The anchor triggers the discipline without requiring the daily recommitment that makes discipline feel like effort. It is now just what happens after the coffee is made. Strategy 6. create a specific physical environment for the disciplined behavior and use it exclusively for that behavior. The desk where only deep work happens. The corner of the room where only training happens. The chair where only reading happens. The brain forms strong environmental associations. The same cue that triggers the disciplined behavior, reinforced through repetition, begins firing the readiness state before the session begins. You sit at the desk, and the brain is already in work mode. You lace the shoes, and the body is already in training mode. The environment cue reduces the start friction to almost nothing, because the environment itself is doing the motivating through association that was built through previous sessions. Strategy 7. Protect the recovery that makes the discipline sustainable. The addiction to discipline is not maintained through continuous intensity. It is maintained through the cycle of effort and recovery that keeps the effort producing results rather than depleting the capacity for it. A man who runs the disciplined practice without adequate rest builds toward burnout, not addiction. A man who builds the rest into the architecture, the rest day, the lighter session, the genuine recovery, maintains the quality of the disciplined effort across months and years. The addiction is to the full cycle, not to the effort alone. Banner's architecture included the recovery. The Hulk was not the output of endless activation. It was the output of a managed cycle. Your discipline practice runs the same way. You came into this expecting 7 techniques for forcing yourself to be more disciplined, more effective willpower application, better tools for winning the daily fight against the preference for ease. Every strategy on this list removes a fight rather than winning one. The completion reward removes the fight between effort and distant outcome. The identity language removes the fight between behavior and self-concept. The shrunken session removes the fight at the start. The anchor removes the daily recommitment fight. The environment removes the readiness fight. The streak direction removes the perfectionism fight. The recovery removes the sustainability fight. The discipline addiction is not built by becoming someone who wins the fight with themselves every day. It is built by removing the fights one by one until the discipline runs in the absence of resistance rather than in constant opposition to it. That is what Banner built. That is what these 7 strategies build. Tonight, 2 strategies. The 2 that address the specific points in your current discipline practice where the resistance is highest and the withdrawal rate is most consistent. If the sessions never feel rewarding in themselves, strategy 1, build the completion acknowledgement tonight. A mark, a sentence, 30 seconds. Do it after the next session and every session after it. If the start is consistently the hardest part, strategy 3, reduce the session to the size where starting feels like almost nothing. Set that as the minimum. Start tomorrow at the minimum. The room takes care of itself once you are through the door. Banner did not become effective by getting better at fighting himself. He became effective by stopping the fight and building something that ran in the absence of the conflict he had been trying to win. 7 strategies. 2 installations tonight. The addiction begins not when the discipline feels good. It begins when the architecture starts producing the neurochemical response that makes the brain seek the discipline rather than resist it. That begins with the first completion reward. Tonight, after the first thing completed, discipline does not become an addiction through willpower. It becomes an addiction when the architecture around it is built to reward the brain for showing up. Build the architecture. The willpower becomes irrelevant. 2 strategies. Tonight, the first completion reward after the next session. The first session shrunken to the size where starting is easy. The architecture begins with those 2 changes. Everything after them is the compound interest on the decision to stop fighting and start building. One question: which of the 7 strategies, name the number, describes the specific fight in your current discipline practice that costs you the most withdrawals? Drop it in the comments. That fight is the first one to remove, not win. If this reframed discipline from a fight to an architecture, subscribe. More of this. The fight is optional. The architecture is not.